They say home is where the heart is. But what if your heart is broken and your home is gone? What if the people you love most forget who you are? And what if your silence becomes your greatest weapon? My trip to see my sister. I found my bedroom gone, and my son's wife smiling in the guest room. She didn't know about the $280 million. When I opened the door to my own home, the first thing I smelled was not the nice smell of fresh flowers I had hoped for. Instead, there was a strong, bad smell of burning sage. It was not the gentle smell you use to make a room feel calm. It was the smell of someone trying to erase something or someone from a place. Then I heard her voice. It was Clarice, my son's wife. She was loud and clear, speaking from the hallway. "This is my house now," she said, holding a glass of wine. She was standing in front of a group of her friends. "The old lady just lives in my husband's memory, and even that is going away." They all laughed. They laughed as if she had not just dismissed 40 years of my life as a silly little thing. I did not say anything. I just walked inside and closed the door behind me. I had been gone for 3 weeks. My sister, Marjorie, had a fall, and I had gone to help her get better. I cooked her soup and washed her hair. Every day I thought about coming home. I miss my garden. I miss my old rocking chair. I missed the smell of the cedar chest in my bedroom. But I never thought that my own bedroom would be gone. I walked through the living room quietly. No one looked up. They were all too busy laughing and talking about their fancy lives. When I got to the hallway, I stopped. My heart started beating very fast. The photo of my wedding used to hang there, the one where my husband had his arm around my shoulders and looked at me as if he still couldn't believe I said yes. It was gone. In its place was a big picture of Clarice and my son on a beach, holding hands. It was as if they had invented love. The door to my bedroom, what used to be my bedroom, was wide open. Inside, the furniture was moved around. My old quilt was gone. In its place were new white and gold pillows and a fancy fake fur blanket. Above the bed, there was a new sign that said, "His and hers manifestation space." Clarice was standing in the middle of the room, giving a glass of wine to a friend. "We burned sage in the room to get her smell out," she said, pointing to the corner where my nightstand used to be. Her friends giggled. "She's like a ghost," one of them whispered. "Maybe she left something in the will," another one added, "like her false teeth." "I hope she just disappears," a third friend said, sitting on the bed where I used to pray every night. I did not say anything. I just walked back to the living room. My suitcase, the same one I had packed to go see Marjorie, was still sitting by the door. No one offered to help me with it. No one even noticed it was there. Later that night, Clarice told me that she had changed my bedroom to have positive energy and that it had become a healing space for her and my son. "You can sleep on the couch, Evelyn," she said, pointing to a stiff floral sofa I had not sat on in years. "It's actually better for your blood flow at your age." She smiled as if she was doing something good for me. I looked at my son, but he was busy with his phone. He just mumbled, "It's only for a little while, Mom," without even looking at me. I stood there for a long time, holding my suitcase with both hands. I did not ask for my room back. I did not argue. I just nodded. That night, I lay on the couch, wrapped in an old blanket that was too small for me. My back hurt, and the lamp buzzed with a low sound. I could hear them laughing from down the hall. My room, which was now her room, glowed under the light of candles. The next morning, Clarice handed me a bottle of green juice. "Brunch starts at 11 o'clock, she said. "Try not to be seen, okay? My friends like things to be simple and clean." Simple and clean? That's what I had become to them. Something to get rid of. I walked to the backyard and sat on a bench next to my dying flowers. The water hose was dry. No one had watered them while I was gone. I whispered, "I'm still here." But even the flowers looked like they did not believe me. That evening, as I walked past the dining room, I saw a note taped to the refrigerator. No fridge items after 7 p.m. No eating after a certain time. And under it, someone had written with a black pen, "For people who live here only." That was the night I knew they wanted me to disappear. Not just from the house, but from their memories, from their history, from the walls and rooms, and the life I had built piece by piece. But what they didn't know was that ghosts do not fade away. Not if they remember who they are. And I remembered. I remembered every nail my husband hammered into the walls of this house. I remembered the day we planted the dogwood tree in the front yard. I remembered the night my son was born in that same room Clarice had burned sage in. And I remembered something else, too. Something I had not told them yet. I have always believed that being cruel doesn't happen with a scream. It comes in slowly, with a smile. It starts with small things. A door left slightly open. A photo quietly taken down. A look that is too long to be harmless, but too short to be kind. The morning after the brunch, I tried to connect to the Wi-Fi to check an email from my sister. The password had been changed. I asked Clarice about it. She didn't even look up from her yoga mat. "Oh," she said, acting like it was no big deal. "We changed it while you were gone. It's for people who live here only now." She said the word residence as if I were a stranger who was only staying for a short time. I just nodded, said nothing, and walked away. Later that afternoon, I opened the refrigerator for some milk. A bright pink sticky note was stuck on the carton. Not for old people, plant-based only. I looked at it for a long time. I don't know what hurt more, being called an old person like some old item in the back of the fridge, or realizing that someone had taken the time to write that note by hand and stick it there for me to find. At lunchtime, Clarice sent a group message on the family chat. "Please stay out of the kitchen during brunch cooking. It's a high-energy zone." Then she sent another message right below it. "Also, please do not move anything on the counter. Energy matters." I had never touched her counter. I hadn't even boiled water since I got back. But my presence alone could mess up her energy. That night, I walked past the table in the entryway and saw a card propped up on a small silver stand. It said, "New home blessing. May this house be free of ghosts." I guess I was the ghost. I stood in the hall in front of the bedroom door that used to be mine. The smell of burnt sage was still there. The walls had been painted a boring beige to match the look of her online brand. They even changed the curtains. The ones I had made by hand with roses and vines were gone, probably thrown away, just like everything else I loved. I didn't cry. I just watched the light flicker in the hallway and listened to the sound of wine glasses clinking behind that door. Some nights, I would sit on the couch with a blanket pulled up to my chest and listen to old voice messages on my phone. My husband's voice was still there, that calm, steady sound of a man who had never once made me feel like I was in the way. It is strange how a house can be full of sounds, and none of them talk to you. But not all the sounds were unkind. It happened on a Tuesday evening. Everyone else was out for Clarice's full moon sound bath. It was just me and little Natalie, my 9-year-old granddaughter, at home. She walked into the living room, dragging her stuffed bunny by one ear. She stood in front of me for a long time, quiet, as if she was trying to get the courage to say something risky. Then she reached into the front pocket of her hoodie and pulled out a small, wrinkled piece of fabric. "I saved this," she whispered. "They threw away your pillow, but I cut out the soft part before it was taken." She carefully unfolded it. It was a faded corner of my old pillowcase, the one with the stitched edge that had unraveled after many years of being held close. "I thought you might still want it," she added, her eyes looking toward the hallway as if she was afraid of being heard. My throat felt tight. I reached out with both hands, took the piece gently, and pressed it to my chest. For a moment, I could feel the old cotton against my skin. I could remember the nights I had cried into it after my husband passed away. I could remember the nights I folded it neatly before bed. The mornings it smelled of the lavender bags from the drawer. I looked at Natalie. She was biting her lip. "Do you miss your room?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "I liked when it smelled like cinnamon," she said, "and you used to let me sit on your lap and read." "You still can," I whispered. She leaned in and sat down beside me, her head against my shoulder. It was the first time in weeks that I felt like I had not disappeared. The next day, the cruelty started again. Clarice dropped a basket of laundry on the couch while I was still sitting on it and said, "If you're going to be here all day, you might as well fold something." She smiled. She always smiled when she said mean things. But something had changed in me. Maybe it was Natalie's small act of love. Maybe it was the feeling of that pillow fabric in my hand. Maybe it was the sound of my own heart saying, "You still matter." That night, when I walked past the room again, I did not look away. I opened the door slowly, stepped inside, and stood still. The air was thick with lavender candles and expensive incense. I reached for the nightstand. It wasn't mine anymore, but in the drawer was something they hadn't found. An old lamp, a gift from my husband many years ago, was still plugged in and humming quietly when I turned the switch. They thought it was just a lamp, but I remembered something about it. They didn't. And suddenly, I was no longer afraid. They wanted to erase me, but they had forgotten who had created the story they were trying to rewrite. And that story was not over yet. My husband never believed in shouting. He used to say, "If they can't hear you whisper, they were never listening anyway." But the last thing he ever said to me, the one sentence I never forgot, happened on a quiet afternoon just weeks before he died. I was brushing his hair by the window, and he reached for my wrist and held it with surprising strength. "If they ever try to erase you," he said, "don't fight loudly, fight cleverly." At the time, I thought he was just being poetic, but I see now that he wasn't just using pretty words. He was preparing me. And so, I didn't yell when they changed the locks on the upstairs linen closet. I didn't protest when Clarice moved my favorite armchair into the garage to make room for her furniture. I didn't even react when my own wedding photo was replaced with a simple art print that said, "New Era Energy." I waited, and I remembered. There was one item I had insisted on keeping from our old bedroom when they changed it. A lamp. It was just an old brass lamp with a slightly wobbly shade and a base that had once been scratched by our cat. Everyone else thought it was ugly, too old, too heavy. Clarice tried to replace it twice with something from her influencer gift sets, but I always brought it back. She eventually gave up. People always do when they think you no longer matter. That lamp had been a wedding gift. My husband had a retired electrical engineer who owed him a favor, make it especially for me. I never knew why he went through so much trouble for a bedside lamp. He just smiled and said, "Some things shine brighter when the world gets dark." It wasn't until he was gone, until the house was filled with other people's voices, that I remembered the small latch beneath the base. That night, I unplugged the lamp and turned it upside down on my lap. My fingers found the metal ridge beneath the felt. I peeled it back slowly, and there it was, a thin silver disc, no larger than a button, hidden perfectly inside the base. A small message was written around the edge. "If you hear this, it means you need to..." I took a deep breath and pressed it. The lamp didn't light up, but the room changed anyway. His voice came through, as clear as day. Calm, steady, and firm. "This is Richard Allen Byrne," he began. "I am recording this message as part of our private estate contract, witnessed and legalized on June 12, 2008. This message is for my wife, Eleanor, and the legal parties named in Clause 9C. My heart pounded. I held the lamp close, not daring to breathe. My assets, intellectual property, and home are protected by a trust. However, an extra clause has been included. This clause should not be shared unless my wife is directly disrespected or forced out of her rightful home." There was a pause. The moment she is made to feel unwelcome in her home, verbally, physically, or symbolically, is the moment all other beneficiaries lose their claim. In that moment, full ownership transfers to her name with the legal power to remove any resident at will. I stared into the dark. He had known. Somehow he had known, and he had left me a weapon, not one made of metal or anger, but of something far more terrifying to people like Clarice, the truth backed by the law. I put the lamp back carefully, wrapped it in an old sweater, and placed it in a box labeled seasonal decorations. No one would touch it there. Then I waited until Monday morning when Clarice took her manifestation hike and my son left for work. I made a call. I didn't call the family lawyer. I called Margot Doyle, my husband's oldest colleague, the woman who once joked, "If the sharks ever start circling, Ellie, I'll be the net." Margot answered on the first ring. "Eleanor," she said, her voice sharp and warm at the same time. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." "I have something," I said, "something Richard left behind. Hidden. You'll need to hear it for yourself." I sent the lamp to her the next day, packed in bubble wrap, and labeled simply to MD, "Play at your desk alone." She called me 2 days later. "I always knew your husband was a clever man," she said, "but this is a work of art. Will it hold up?" I asked. "In court, like a rock," she replied. "The only thing left is to officially activate the clause. Do you have proof of mistreatment?" I thought of the brunch, the comments, the sticky notes, the locked cabinet. "I have more than proof," I said. "I have a child's whisper and a scrap of pillowcase. I have a wedding photo in a drawer and a ghost blessing taped to the door. And I have silence. So much silence." Margot didn't need to be convinced. We arranged the rest using code words. Package delivery meant court filing. Sunlight refund meant a formal hearing date. Lavender tea meant a court order to appear. It almost felt fun, like being in one of those detective shows Clarice always made fun of. But this wasn't a show. This was my life. And I wasn't going to sit on the couch another week while someone else burned sage in the place I once called my sanctuary. I dusted off my good shoes. I ironed my blouse. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman with a purpose. My voice wasn't loud, but now it had a loudspeaker, and they had no idea what was coming. It all began decades ago over cheap wine and even cheaper office chairs. My husband and I started our first business with a stack of ideas on napkins, a few boxes of used parts, and a stubborn refusal to give up. He handled the patents and the sales pitches. I handled the people, the contracts, the deals, and the long meetings that went on until dinner. We didn't have fancy job titles, but we were equal in every way that mattered. When the business finally took off, Richard said to me one day over breakfast, "Let's put our shares into a trust quietly, just in case." "In case of what?" I asked. "In case the world ever gets noisy," he replied without looking up from his eggs. At the time, I thought it was a sweet thing to say. It turns out it was a weapon he had made long before the war had even begun. The trust had stayed untouched for almost 20 years. We never used it, never bragged about it, even when a famous magazine put his face on a page, or when we got calls from people wanting to invest, we would just smile politely and say, "No, thank you." We kept our lives simple. What Clarice never understood was that quiet wealth doesn't look like yachts or expensive purses. It looks like a woman baking muffins in an old house with $28 million safely parked in a trust deed that no one had bothered to look at in decades. Until now, Margot and I sat in the conference room side by side. Across from us were Clarice and my son Aaron, both acting as though this was just some silly argument over a few square feet of space. They didn't know what was coming. "Not yet. Let's begin," Margot said, sliding a leather folder across the table. "This is the official reading of the Byrne Domestic Living Trust, last updated in 2011. Clarice rolled her eyes. Margot continued, calm and steady. Clause 14b, also known as the Conduct Clause, states the following. Any individual, whether family or legal heir, who knowingly subjects Eleanor Byrne to verbal disrespect, emotional displacement, or forces her out of the shared household will immediately and permanently lose all rights to inheritance and occupancy." I looked at Aaron. He was pale. Clarice laughed. "That's crazy. You can't enforce a mood." "We are not enforcing a mood," Margot said calmly. We are enforcing documented violations. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a USB stick, a stack of printed photos, and a lamp. Yes, the same lamp that had lived on my bedside table for years. Now, it sat in the middle of the table, like a witness called to tell the truth. Margot plugged the USB stick into the monitor. First, a video clip. Clarice at her brunch, champagne in hand, sitting on my bed. This is my house now. The old lady just lives in my husband's memory, and even that's fading. Laughter could be heard in the background. Another voice. Maybe she left something in the will, like her false teeth. And then Clarice again. I hope she just disappears. The room went silent. My heart didn't beat fast. It was slow and steady like a rock. I had heard it live, but hearing it now, with the power of the law behind it, made it strong. Next came the photos. One showed the bedroom door with a new sign, his and hers manifestation space. Another showed the brunch guests sitting on my old quilt. Another showed me curled up on the living room sofa under a blanket next to a note that read, "For blood flow." Finally, Margot picked up the lamp. This lamp contains a digital audio recording made by Richard Byrne, dated and time-stamped June 12, 2008, in the presence of a notary. It was sealed and stored in a secure compartment inside the base. The audio has been confirmed by experts and is considered legal evidence under state law. She pressed play. Richard's voice filled the room. The moment she is made to feel unwelcome in her home, verbally, physically, or symbolically, is the moment all other beneficiaries lose their claim. In that moment, full ownership transfers to her name with the legal power to remove any resident at will. Aaron shifted in his seat. Clarice's eyes got narrow. You can't be serious. This is crazy. Margot smiled, the kind of smile lawyers use when they have one. It's not crazy. It's legal. The trust is valid. The clause is active. The evidence is more than enough. She turned to me. Eleanor, according to Clause 14b, would you like to use your rights under the trust? I looked at Clarice, not with anger, but with something deeper. Pity, maybe, or maybe a quiet satisfaction. Yes, I said, effective immediately. Margot handed me a pen. With one signature, it was done. Clarice was completely cut off from the trust. No financial support, no claim to the house, no more lavender brunches on my linens. Aaron would keep a part of the trust, but only if he moved out of the house within 3 days and wrote a formal apology for his part in this. They both stormed out, their faces red and angry. Clarice tried to slam the door on the way out. It bounced back softly. I had already replaced the hinges. Margot turned to me as I gathered my things. What will you do with the house? She asked. I smiled. I'll sell it, even after all this, especially after all this. Because the truth was, this house had stopped feeling like home the moment I was forced to whisper in the hallways. A home isn't just walls and photos. It's about being safe. It's about comfort. It's about being allowed to take up space. Now that I had it back, I no longer needed it. But the freedom that I would keep. They made me sit at the far end of the table, near the water cooler, away from the windows, as if I might get a cold from the truth. Clarice walked in first, wearing sunglasses indoors and carrying a fancy bag I suspected she didn't buy with her own money. My son followed, late as always, his phone in one hand, chewing gum as if he had more important things to do than attend his own father's while reading. Let's get this over with, he muttered, slouching into the chair across from me. She probably left you some old tea sets and that darn lamp. Clarice snorted. Don't expect any money for her. She'll be dead by Christmas anyway. I folded my hands in my lap, not shaking, not reacting, just waiting. Margot, my lawyer, gave me a small nod. She opened a thin leather folder and turned up the volume on the small speaker device in front of her. No paper copies today, she said, as per Mr. Byrne's final instruction. The main parts of the will are to be delivered in his voice only. Aaron raised an eyebrow. What the heck does that mean? Margot pressed the button, and Richard spoke. Not the weak version of him near the end, but the Richard the first remembered, clear, strong, and serious. If my son or his wife ever disrespect the woman who built this house, if they ever make her feel like she is less than she is, take everything from them. I built my name, my company, and my money with Eleanor. And if you have forgotten that, then you have forgotten who raised you. Aaron leaned forward, shocked. Richard's voice continued, even calmer now. To Clarice, your brunches may be cute, but cruelty is not. This house was not built with mood boards and sage sticks. It was built by my wife, who scrubbed parts by hand while raising a son I now struggle to recognize. Clarice opened her mouth. Then for once, she shut it. To Eleanor, I name you the only person in charge and the only beneficiary. This trust, assets, property, and shares go completely to your name the moment my voice ends. Then there was silence, not just in the room, but inside them. Aaron sat still. Clarice's face twisted, looking for a way out, some legal language she could use as a weapon, but there wasn't one, because Richard had planned it better than they ever could. Margot slid over the new deed paperwork, already signed by the notary. Effective immediately, Mrs. Eleanor Byrne is the sole owner of the following assets: the primary residence at 814 Redwood Lane, full rights to the Byrne Trust, which is worth $20 million, majority shareholder status in Byrne Solutions, Incorporated, and exclusive ownership of the intellectual property portfolio. Clarice stood up so quickly her chair fell backward. This is against the law, she yelled. You can't just cut family out like that. Margot didn't even blink. Yes, we can. And he did. Every document was filed, time-stamped, witnessed, and backed by a voice recording. This is completely legal. Clarice turned to Aaron, her eyes wild. Do something. He looked at me instead. For the first time in years. You knew about this, he said, his voice low. I knew about the lamp, I said softly. But the rest, no, I didn't ask for it. He just remembered. Clarice grabbed her purse and stormed out. Aaron stayed seated, his eyes empty. You could have told me. I could have, I agreed. But would it have changed how you treated me? He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up slowly. Do you want me out by tomorrow? You have 3 days, I said. That's more than you gave me. He nodded. There was no fight left in him. When he left the room, the feeling in the air changed. Margot leaned back and let out a breath. That's the first time I've seen a clause like that work so smoothly. I smiled slightly. It wasn't written out of anger. No, it was written out of memory. Richard remembered who I was before they tried to erase me. She started organizing the papers. What will you do next? I'm going to pack my lamp and my little chair, I said, standing up, and then I think I'll go home and start looking for a buyer. Margot paused. You're selling the house. You just got it back. Exactly, I said, and that's all I needed to know. It was mine before I chose to leave it. At the door, I stopped and looked back at the conference table, at the empty chairs, at the silence they left behind. They thought they could make me disappear, but all they did was bring me back. And now I was the one holding the pen. The court order was clear. No arguments, no appeals. You have 72 hours to leave the property. I didn't need to read it again. I watched Aaron's face as the officer handed him the document. He didn't blink, just stared at the official seal as if it might melt if he looked at it long enough. Clarice, on the other hand, went crazy. This is abuse, she screamed. She's abusing the legal system. She's abusing us. I stood silently, my coat buttoned, my hands folded, the same way I had stood quietly in the hallway 3 weeks ago while she drank wine on my bed and called it the rebirth suite. Now, the bed was mine again, and the rebirth was mine, too. Aaron stepped forward, his voice softer than I had heard it in years. Please, Mom. It was just a joke. All of it. We didn't mean it. You know, Clarice, she talks big. But I turned my eyes to him. I let the silence sting for just a moment longer. You joked. I said, each word careful and clear. The will listened. He dropped his head, The sound of the paper falling to the ground filled the room. Clarice was next. Her makeup was already running down her face, her hands waving around like a drowning woman clinging to furniture. "You're heartless," she sobbed. "We welcomed you back. We let you stay. You let me sleep on a sofa in the house I built," I said. "You covered my face in sage and called it a blessing. I gave you a home. You gave me hell." She gasped, but no more words came out. Just a loud, sharp sound that even the chandelier seemed to wince at. I turned and walked down the hallway of my own house. The walls were still painted beige, her favorite color of boring. But the light felt different now, warmer, clearer. Room by room, I took back what had been taken. In the dining room, I reached for the sideboard drawer. Inside were my embroidered napkins, hidden beneath Clarice's gold-trimmed ones, as if my handmade stitches were not good enough for wine glasses. In the study, I opened a drawer labeled with a sticker that read, "Manifestation books only." I smiled, peeled the sticker off, and put it in my pocket. And then I entered the master bedroom. My bedroom. The rebirth suite, as she had called it. I stared at the vision board she had hung above the headboard, filled with magazine cutouts and phrases like, "This year is mine," and "Claim it, girl." I ripped it down in one motion. As I folded the torn poster board, something else caught my eye. Dozens of small sticky notes were still stuck to the furniture, vases, and drawers. Each one had a thick marker note on it. "This one's mine. This one, too. Mine." Manifested by Clarice. I went room by room, pulling off every last one. In the kitchen, "This pot is mine." In the hallway, "Eleanor's lamp. Don't touch." On the mirror, "Her reflection is fading. Mine is just beginning." I didn't cry. Not once. I put them all in a brown envelope, sealed it shut, and set it on the couch. Yes, the one I used to sleep on. I labeled it with a single word, "Returned." Later that evening, Aaron knocked gently on my door. He didn't come in until I told him to. He stood there, wringing his hands like a schoolboy caught lying. "We'll go," he said. "I just wanted you to know it didn't start this way. We didn't plan to be cruel." I nodded. "But it ended that way." He looked down. "I miss Dad." "I do too," I whispered. "But missing someone doesn't give you permission to become someone they would hate." He nodded again, slower. "Do you need help packing?" I asked. "No, we'll be out by Friday." He left quietly. Clarice didn't say goodbye, and I didn't expect her to. That night, I made tea with my favorite porcelain cup, the one I found stuffed in the back of the pantry with a note on it that said, "Too old ladyish." I sat by the window. The lights from the garden flickered softly, just as Richard had designed them decades ago. They were motion-activated, solar-powered, and worked very well. "Always leave something behind that works without you," he used to say. I think he did. And now, so will I. I sold the house the next morning. No second thoughts, no tours, no waiting. I signed the papers with a calm hand while Clarice was still yelling into her phone on the front lawn. And Aaron stood beside her, his eyes empty, watching everything slip through his fingers. I didn't look back. Within 2 weeks, I was living in a quiet little apartment near Central Park in New York. It was one bedroom with a small kitchen and a balcony that was just big enough for a rocking chair and a potted plant. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. Mine, not borrowed, not tolerated, not walked around as if I were invisible. Every morning, I took walks through the park. I watched dogs chase birds. I listened to the sounds of violins from musicians under the trees. I started reading again, real books, the kind with folded corners, and no deadlines. No one interrupted. No one told me what I couldn't eat or where I could sit. It was the kind of silence that heals, not the kind they gave me before. I thought about how easily they had tried to erase me, not just with cruelty, but with their fake performances with brunches and hashtags and phrases like, "good for blood flow at her age." It wasn't just Clarice. It was the whole world she represented. A world that smiles while it quietly rewrites you out of your own story. So, I did something with the silence. I used it to start something new. I took $2 million from the inheritance and set up a fund called Women Who Were Erased. It's small for now, but it's real. The fund offers legal help, emergency housing, and emotional support for older women who have been thrown out by their families. Women who are told they are too much or are in the way. Women who are made fun of behind their backs while standing right there. Women like me, but not anymore. My name is not on the foundation plaque. I don't want it to be. Let the world think it came from nowhere, just like they once thought I did. But there's one thing I kept. Taped to my fridge door above the grocery list is a note from my youngest grandchild, written in crooked block letters with a pink glitter pen. Grandma, 1. Mean lady, 0. I see it every morning when I open the fridge. And every morning it reminds me that some victories are quiet, but they echo forever. There's a wooden plaque on the door of my new apartment now. I carved it myself with an old penknife my husband gave me one Christmas when money was tight, and love was all we had. The words on it are simple, carved deep. This house was once imagined out of existence. Now it thinks for itself. It's not just a door, it's a new beginning. Inside, everything is small but meaningful. A chair that fits me just right. A soft rug beneath my bare feet. The quiet sound of the city outside coming through my clean, warm windows. And the fridge. Right there on the fridge is the note from my granddaughter, written on pink paper. Her letters are uneven, glitter smudged in the corner. Grandma, 1. Mean lady, 0. I didn't tape it there. She did, quietly, when her mother wasn't looking during one of her last visits. She hugged me tight that day, whispered, "I'm proud of you," and tucked a tiny paper heart into my coat pocket. That night, I sat in my armchair with the city lights flickering outside, like stars I could almost touch. And I let myself cry, not from pain, but from relief. For all the times I had held back my words, turned the other cheek, and made myself smaller, so others could feel big. Not anymore. I drink coffee in silence now. Not silence because I was forced to, but silence I choose. I stretch when I wake up. I light candles when it rains. I think out loud. I think about the versions of me they invented, ghost, burden, a fading memory. And then I remember. None of those were ever mine. I was never fading. I was watching. I was waiting for the right moment. And when it came, I didn't raise my voice. I raised the will. I raised the truth. I raised myself. Now, when the wind shakes the windows and the world outside forgets to be kind, I stand at my doorway, run my fingers across the carved wood, and say to no one and everyone, they thought I was fading, but I was just waiting for the right moment to think out loud.